School is in, but are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with the Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share, and share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on the Awakening Educator.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Awakening Educator. My name is Megan Sweet.
And I'm Susan Andrian.
And today we're kicking off our first in a three-part series on equity in education. And this is a special one for me because our guest is a former student of mine and one of my special favorites, which you're not supposed to have as a teacher, but I did, Miss Crystal Gix. And today what we'll be talking about is her experience as a student and then as a teacher in our education system. And I figured it would be only fair if we're going to ask students to talk about their teachers that, you know, I put myself up for the conversation. So we'll have that discussion. And I want to introduce Crystal a little bit before we get going. So Crystal is a native of Oakland, California, and a graduate of San Jose State University. And she currently resides in Los Angeles. She's an actress, a print model, a literacy advocate, and a former educator. She's currently publishing her first children's book geared towards exposing the experience of lacking through the lens of a struggling student's eyes. And the book is titled Pumpkin Learns to Read, correct?
Yes.
Crystal Gix, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So excited to have you here.
Crystal, I'm so excited. Like to have met one of Megan's students is great because I want to hear all the dirt about her.
Oh yeah, I got all the dirt.
And I think it's just really important that we're kicking off our season 2 with equity, and that we're coming from a place from the lens of students, and also where you are right now, really looking at equity and bringing children's literature to the table. I think so. We're excited. We're really excited, and I'm looking for the dirt. So.
Well, and today is the, I want to say, the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, if I'm correct. So this is a auspicious day.
I believe you are correct.
To be kicking off this series. And so, Crystal, maybe you can talk a little bit about yourself before we get into, you know, just like maybe what you're up to now, and then we'll start grilling you about what it was like to be a kid in my class.
Okay, well, I don't know where to start. So, you know, you already mentioned the book. So I do have the book, which kind of came from my experiences growing up in school and everything. But what sparked it was me teaching in the classroom and seeing myself and some of my students. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm looking, I mean, you know, boys and girls, I'm looking at myself and the experiences that they were having. And that's what sparked me to write this book. And I wanted to, you know, get the illustrations in there because I wanted children to read it, but I also wanted parents to read it. And I wanted teachers to read it because I felt like this experience was important. And it's just so ironic that right now I'm speaking to you about it. And I just so happened to write that book, you know, a few years ago. And I'm just now getting it published. So yeah, everything is kind of full circle here. So that's the book. Like you said, I am an actress.
And where can folks buy your book? Just so we can plug it a few times because I think it's important, but when it rolls out, where will it be available?
It'll be available on Amazon. And they can also go to crystalgix.com to find the link for that, or any of the social medias. You can look up my name you can just Google my name and find anywhere to purchase the book. And that's pretty much that, like Amazon and my website mainly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And so like I said, I'm an actress and print model. and an advocate for literacy. I was working, when I stopped teaching, I actually started doing literacy advocacy. So I started working with this organization in Houston where we would go in and talk to parents and try to get them actively engaged with their children's learning process outside of just sending homework home, because, you know, a lot of times when you send homework home, the kids are responsible, even though the parents, we expect it just doesn't happen. So we would have these after school meetings and get the parents involved. And I thought it was pretty cool. And it just really gave me the jitters. I'm like, oh, I really like this. I really do like this, but I didn't, yeah, it was really nice.
So what got you interested in literacy, and, you know, maybe a little bit of the story of how you wrote the book, because this is actually a part of you, and you were my student, that I didn't know. So I was really curious about your experience in elementary school. I had you as a middle school student, as a sixth grader. But I'm just wondering, like, what that early experience was and why literacy feels like the important piece for you.
Well, I was one of those kids that was just getting passed along growing up. So I was in towards the end of second grade before I learned how to read. So I didn't know how to read. I didn't know basic 3-letter words or anything. And when I was younger, I was like, you know, when I was younger and I didn't understand the difference between what my mom was going through then versus, you know, now, I was upset with her because it took me so long and I was lacking. And, you know, she was a single parent and everything. But I learned to read very late, which sparked the book, which is The Pumpkin Learns to Read. That's my nickname growing up. And being passed along, when I did finally learn how to read, it made me blossom with math and everything as well, because I lacked in math.
Right.
I lacked everywhere. And when I became a literacy advocate, I learned how much literacy plays a part in everything that you do, whether it's, you know, cooking, cleaning, anything that you're doing, you have to tie it all together. And once I learned how to read back in second grade, the end of second grade, everything started to make so much more sense. And I used to get in so much trouble growing up.
I cannot believe that.
Oh yeah, first of all, I'm a motor mouth. All of my report cards, like back when they used to give, you know, G's and E's, I would get an S. And what did you call that area?
Yeah, I always got the N's.
Yeah, I used to get the N's.
Needs improvement.
Needs improvement. Crystal talks too much.
You still know what an N is.
Right, not satisfactory. Yeah, I used to get into so much trouble because I would be off task during reading time. And what it was I couldn't read. And it wasn't that I was just so bored. I didn't understand what was going on. I loved reading about Frog and Toad. I love those stories, but I couldn't tell you what was happening outside of the pictures or just listening.
Right.
You know, so that's pretty much how that all got started in terms of like my passion for it. And once I did learn how to read, I became an excellent speller. And I started skyrocketing in class. My mom's, you know, we switched a lot of schools because I moved a lot. But afterwards, you know, third grade rolled around, my grades improved, my behavior improved. I stopped getting in trouble for things because now I can focus. Now I know what's going on. Fourth grade, now I'm back in my old school in East Oakland. And I had this really mean teacher. She was scary. She was really scary. And she would embarrass you to no end. So I wasn't about to get embarrassed. I didn't like being embarrassed. So that's when I started being quiet because I didn't want to be, you know, embarrassed or get into trouble, especially from her. And so in me being quiet, I was able to pick up quickly what was going on because I didn't want to be talked about in that classroom. Now, this is in the 90s, you know, you can't get away with any of that stuff now, but this is back then. That's a good kind of job. But you know, she was a very old school Southern teacher, but she was working in Oakland for like 30, 40 years. But I would be really quiet, and that allowed me to pick up, you know, what was going on in the classroom and see what was working, what wasn't working really, really quickly. And I moved ahead in the classroom really quick. And before I knew it, I was grading homework. So
wow.
That was pretty much how it all got
back
started.
to second grade when you first started to learn how to read. Do you remember the adult or what the intervention was that really kind of was able, and what that felt like to all of a sudden be getting what you needed and what you deserved to learn?
uh, it felt like, I don't know, I was so excited. It was, my mom had moved to Concord. We moved to Concord, and this was the end of second grade, beginning of third grade. And I don't remember the teacher's name, but and getting in trouble so much, the one teacher that called it out, she had someone come and pick me out of class. It was a lady with like a British accent. She was an interventionist, I guess, and she did a 1 hour pullout one day. And she took me to this room and she literally did phonics with me for 45 minutes to an hour. And I knew how to read because I was hungry for it. I literally wanted to know what was going on. I didn't know that's what I wanted. I just was, floating through, and I don't even think I was confident in the alphabet or sounds. And I was, approaching third grade at this time. But after getting in trouble for so long, I think my teacher finally realized I could not read. And so they had the interventionist come in and just, take me out for that hour. And she showed me phonics. And before I know it, she gave me like 3 or 4 books to take home. And you couldn't tell me anything. I knew I was like cat, bat, dog, frog all day long and just sounding out everything. You couldn't shut me up. On the freeway, every exit, I'm learning how to call box. I did that for weeks. I got on my mom's nerves.
I bet. Well, but I mean, what an amazing thing, right? And I feel like as a teacher, what you're describing is, I mean, this gives me chills, especially since I know you 4 years later and who you were, and I will describe that to you. I told you I wouldn't tell you till we're on the air, so you can't do anything to me. But like what a difference it is to have it just takes one adult to notice and get underneath the behavior and be curious enough to see what's there. And what kind of scares me about that is like, what would have happened if that hadn't been true for you, right? Like and I wasn't an easy kid either. And actually I got all the way to college without being able to write an essay. And it took somebody to pull me aside in college and be like, look, girl, like, we're going to hook you up because you don't know how to do some basic things here. And so this idea of being passed along, and that it just requires one person to see you differently or to be curious, to give you that opportunity. It's how many kids that we know that were in my class with you that didn't have that chance. It's like, it gives me chills. Think about that.
And the timing is so critical, right? Because we know that second to third grade, that it happened, it did. It should have happened much earlier. But that you were able to get the intervention to be able to read before that period of time where we lose so many kids at 4th grade, right? We know that that's really a critical time. And so you had that maybe mean teacher who scared you, but it sort of all the timing came together to give you that passion and also skill at the same time.
Well, it sounds like you leave Oakland to get the help, and then you came back and you had the mean teacher, right? So like, it's also schools matter. And that, and I'm not dissing Oakland because, I'm all about Oakland, but like schools matter and opportunities matter. And so you going somewhere where you could be seen more for some reason, or they had more resources, so they had a reading interventionist, which isn't typical in every single school. Suddenly you had access to an opportunity that wasn't available to you in your other schools. So when I had you, I absolutely remember the quiet and the watching. Like, I felt like you were a kid who was paying attention to what was going on. And you felt very like serious and mature to me. So like for me, seeing this actress and this just badass woman who is doing this modeling, and just, I feel like you're such a role model for so many things. I'm not surprised seeing that in you as an adult, but I'm also a little bit surprised in seeing that in you as an adult, because you were much more studious to me and just like a little bit more held back. And we're just watching. And I would look to you, like as a teacher, you look around the room, and I don't know if you knew this, but I would watch you a lot and see what your reactions were and just kind of get a pulse of like how things were going or how you were feeling. And I just paid attention to you a lot in the room because I could tell that there was a lot happening behind what I could see. And I was always just so curious about that. And I really just wanted to impress you, make sure you felt happy, like the insecure young woman in me wanted Crystal to like me. But like I paid attention to you, and I remember that really well, even 20 years later, that you were the student that just, you felt like you had a maturity past your years. I feel like I even said that to your mom at some point in some parent conference or something. Yeah. And I'm wondering, like, I mean, I'm curious for you. So Crystal had a unique experience in my classroom, and maybe we can bring this forward because we're talking about equity today. And I feel like one of the things that, so I had a co-teacher, and we taught and did everything together. So we weren't always in each other's classes. I don't think your year. We actually opened up and shared the same room the next year, Crystal, after you were with us. You weren't in the same big room, were you? You were the year before that, right?
Yeah.
But we would come together a lot, and we'd bring our rooms together a lot. And I'm sure you know now, or maybe you have the perspective now, but Mr. Abdul and I, my co-teacher, we very intentionally wanted to put on display our differences and how we could work together closely and create a supportive environment. He was not shy about calling me out on my whiteness and on when I said and did things that were hurtful for you guys. I don't know if you guys knew that, but like that was legitimately, and it was such a gift, right? Like behind the scenes, he'd be like, sister, when you said this, I'd be like, oh, shoot. Right. So I didn't, because I didn't know, right? Like as a young white woman, I wasn't aware of, I had a sense of privilege. I was like starting to work with that concept, but it wasn't one that was a part of who I was. And I was teaching kids, most of whom didn't look like me. Right. So, and that's still true today. And so it's a wondering I have for you, when you think about that environment, what was that like for you? Were you even noticing? Because we were like so intentional behind the scenes of like, we're going to fight with each other in front of everybody. We're going to love each other in front of everybody. We're going to do all these things that kids can see, because we couldn't be more opposite, right? Mr. Abdul, as an African-American man.
And he's just like the most...
He is steady Eddie. He's a Muslim. He's like very traditional. And I was this very wild hippie girl. So like, for the two of us to be together, I'm curious from your point of view, and I'm not looking for compliments, but what was that like to watch that? Or were you even noticing the interplay between us?
That was a long time ago.
And you were a child.
This is 22 years ago. But I remember you two working together. And now that you mentioned like, a little slight bickering here and there, but it wasn't like confrontational in a sense of like, oh my gosh, look at Miss Sweet and Mr. Abdul. It was like they're having a disagreement and then it was over with. It was like they're working, like I think I remember it as you were working together. It wasn't any pettiness or, anything like that where, oh, I'm not talking to him today kind of thing. It wasn't anything like that. And I rarely remember you both being upset just in your own classrooms. I remember you being upset once.
Oh, I'm sure.
I remember I don't know why. You had a headband on your head. You had this headband on your head right here. And your hair was cut like that. And you were like, I remember.
I'm sure I was upset a lot.
Yeah. And he was upset a lot. He would get mad at us. But
being a teacher's hard.
Yeah, he was tough. But it didn't really have a negative impact at all. I really liked watching you two work together, to be honest, because it was such a contrast to who you were, because you're so opposite. He's Mr. 1, 2, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, military,
That's right.
And you're like, we're going to learn about this ELA, this, all this stuff that's going on in the world. I remember learning about Mesopotamia, all this stuff from back then. And I enjoyed that experience. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I have a white teacher. It wasn't that for me at all.
Yeah.
If that answered the question.
Well, let's answer the question. I mean, it's always a wondering for me, right? As sorry, Susan, I'm just like taking over.
No, it's okay.
I'm checking in with I'm checking in with Crystal. But I mean,
and I do want to hear. I mean, go.
I mean, it's a wondering for me, and it's something that for my whole career I've been worrying about, right? Like and I was very intentional and self-aware of being a white woman in this space, and again, like behind the scenes trying to make moves to either get right with something that I said wrong or did wrong, or again, like intentional, like, yeah, we disagreed with you guys with each other in person, in front of you all on purpose, which is interesting to Stephen to hear that, because we wanted to show that like that can happen and you can move through that. Mm-hmm. But I have always wondered, because I think it's one of the big equity problems we have in our education system is this teaching students that don't look like them dynamic, and I'm one of them. And so I just have wondered like what that was like for you. And so I'm hearing from you that maybe for you that wasn't an issue, or did you feel like you encountered those moments where you weren't seen or understood because you had teachers that didn't look like you in the classroom?
Megan,
sound went out
something
for a
just
half.
changed
Yeah.
in your sound pretty drastically.
Ah, is that why you all leaned in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your voice
Your,
got
your,
really
your voice
My
got
voice
really
got
low.
quiet.
No, it
Oh,
didn't get quiet. It got low and
no. Is it
now
over?
no, I hear myself too echo.
I hit the microphone.
How about this? Is this
Oh, much better. Yeah, you're back to normal.
what I said?
We could hear you, but it was distracting. It almost felt like Darth Vader came into the room.
Just what I said, like white female teacher. That's a perfect time for like. But it is the wondering for me of like, you know, it's something that I've studied and thought a lot about myself as a white female teacher stepping in and teaching kids that look different from me. What was that like for you as going through education? You know, and again, I put myself forward as like, if I'm going to be critical of, you know, how much whiteness there is in education, I need to put myself forward because I'm part of that problem and part of that solution. But I'm wondering for you, as you went through your education, did that come up as an issue for you, or did you feel like you weren't seen, or were there those microaggressions that got in your way as you were learning?
You know, it was kind of like a roller coaster in terms of my experience with, you know, white teachers or non-Black teachers. With you, I did not have any issues in terms of feeling like other or out, you know, out of place or outcast or anything. And I think it's also the area where we were, you know, we're North Oakland, border of Berkeley, very hippie, very, you know, liberal, very, you know, just everybody's all love and we're all equal and there's no violence, you know, kind of feel. So
Right.
it didn't feel like a thing there, you know, and we did have a heavy population.
Well, it's interesting because I worked right down the street at Carter, and you know, at Carter Middle School, which is just not very far from Claremont, and had a very different feel than what you just described.
Really?
I'd say.
You know what I've heard
as a white woman going into that work, doing mental health, 20, you know, it was 2001, and it was a predominantly Black student population and a predominantly Black staff. So I think it was really interesting because it was located right there on the border of Berkeley. And I think we like to believe in that, what you just said around like, there's no violence and it's hippie and it's all love and good. But I don't think that's like the reality for a lot of folks that live in that community.
Yeah.
So it's this weird like juxtaposition. And so I felt like it was really interesting as you were talking, like, I'm like, I was in North Oakland. That's not my experience.
Yeah, right. And so like everybody's experience would be different, right? Because I'm also coming from East Oakland. So I was essentially coming from avoiding the school in the neighborhood in which I lived. I was I transported into town. I caught the BART and the bus to Claremont. Claremont was like, when I got there, you know, you have all these arts programs and everything else and so on and so forth. So I had white teachers before getting to Claremont. Actually, one of my first, I think my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Rogers, she was white. She was a very young woman at the time. And I've had a few in between. The only time I've had issues was when my mom moved me to Concord. And I was one of two Black children in the entire school. That was the only time I felt like an other. I didn't even know what racism was. I didn't know what discrimination was or prejudice or any of that type of stuff. I had no idea until I got to Concord. And I was constantly reminded that I was different, constantly reminded that my behaviors that I brought from East Oakland that was considered normal is now a problem, which is where I started getting in trouble much more. I didn't have as many behavioral issues at my old school because everybody was like me, you know, everybody had the same kind of energy and the teachers just worked within that. Like, okay, these are my students. They're hyper. Let's work with that, you know. And here, everybody's they already know how to read. They already, you know, at a certain level, and so on and so forth. But to stay on topic of me having white teachers, the female or woman teacher that I've had in Concord, I didn't have any issues with. It was the man. He would single me out all day long. That was the first time I'd ever been on time out. He was fussing at me all the time. Crystal, what are you doing now? Crystal, all day. And on top of the fact that, I've got these kids that I go to school with now telling me that, well, my grandfather said, if this was back in the day, I'd own you and MLK would be a slave. And I never heard any of this. I didn't even know what slavery was in second grade. I wasn't quite aware of that yet. So that's the only time I experienced that. I didn't know a lot of stuff about feeling different around having white teachers, because I started so early having white teachers. It wasn't like a thing for me.
That's interesting.
As you're talking, it's so interesting to me because you first described yourself as getting into a lot of trouble and being when you were young, but that actually isn't. That from what you're just saying, that actually doesn't sound true. It sounds like you went to a place that had a different narrative of who you are, and put that label on yourself, which you sort of experienced, because it sounds like before you went to Concord, you didn't get in trouble, and after you went to Concord, you didn't get in trouble. So it really wasn't, so I was just, it's really curious to me that was sort of part of how you just see yourself or describe yourself, for the narrative. But when you put it in this context, I wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is interesting, huh?
Yeah, I appreciate you answering this. I hope it's okay. I feel like we're putting you on the spot, but I hope it's okay.
No, it's fine.
Because I think it's such a big, it's been such a preoccupation of mine, and representation matters. There's plenty of research that shows that you need people that look like you, and I'm a big advocate for that. And I'm also a big advocate for whoever wants to teach. Cool, let's just get you the information you need to be successful there. And again, that's why it's exciting for me to talk with you and to remember those times with Mr. Abdul, because I was getting an education right along all of you. And in some ways that's what's necessary to be an educator. And I'm sure, and I'd love to hear your perspective when you got into the classroom. But at the same time, I get very impatient with that. So if I acknowledge my own worry and anxiety about that, for most of my career, I get real nervous when I see the inequities that are in our schools. And so because of what could happen in a Concord, but also I also know what also can be true, which is you can happen in, I'll say my classroom, but in other classrooms where you feel included or where the teacher is doing the work, then it's possible for there to, we're never going to be with the teacher that looks like us every single time. But so there's this way of being able to create an inclusive and safe and supportive environment that I think, I certainly didn't know and wasn't trained on when I was your teacher. I just was lucky enough to be in a school that I think was pretty open. And, the sixth grade was a very diverse group of teachers. Mr. Abdul was he's a brother and I love him forever. And I feel really indebted to him for just how much he very selflessly trained me. But then I think about but most schools don't have my experience. And I know I messed up anyway. So that's what's my whole career, truly, Crystal, that's what's been in my mind. I had a very charmed experience, and still I know I made mistakes. So I'm wondering, that's a big lead up for me, just to wonder, so you had this experience, you went through school where you had some sounds like some pretty not just microaggressions happen, but racial incidents, so that to be where you're singled out, and then spaces where you felt more included. And then you became a teacher in a classroom. I'm just wondering how those pieces started to come together for you when you became you went full circle and you suddenly became in the classroom. How did your experience, what did you learn is my first question, and then I'll get to my second one. But what came up for you when you're in the classroom?
Well, positive things were, I love kids and I love teaching. I love working and seeing them grow, for sure. And I love seeing that light bulb go off in their head. It's so beautiful to watch, because it's gosh, you went from, just this clay and now it's something, I love that about working with students and teaching. The things that I experienced in teaching that haunted me was also being that teacher for like other kids, that teacher that's like singling them out. And this isn't even a racial thing. It's something that's just ingrained in how we treat certain kinds of kids. And it scared me. I didn't want to be that teacher. And I found myself becoming that because the environment in which I was teaching also, you know, they say, oh, we're not supposed to single children out, but everybody was doing it, you know. And you know, there's the training world, and there's the real world, and there's the professional developments to tell you how to work with conflict resolution, and then there's just the real world. And you know, you have all these kids that have similar lives but very different lives at the same time, and you have to treat them differently. You have to work with them differently because this one doesn't have food at home, this one doesn't have the clothes, this one doesn't know how to read, this one can't count, this one can't even spell their name and they're in third grade, you know. And this one just babysat their sisters overnight and their mom wasn't home at all, and this one never comes to school and sleeps in class. There's just so much going on. My fear was failing them as an educator. It wasn't even about me, because once you step in there and you're like, okay, I'm committed to this, it was about them. And I was like, I felt like I was going to fail them. I was afraid of it. And I was afraid of being that teacher that they remembered, that said something to them and they never forgot, you know, something negative to them and they never forgot. Being under so much pressure, especially my first year on of record, you know, having all that pressure of meeting the district standards, the state standards, and these people walking into your classroom every week with clipboards. What's up with your boards? You got your board, you don't have your banner up. I'm like, you need your grades in by 4:30. School's out at 3:20. I still have kids here sitting here waiting to get picked up. It's just a lot going on, especially for first year teachers. You know, you start getting that gray hair early. So that was my experience teaching. It was very overwhelming. And so, like you say, you tell people if they want to teach, but it's important to know that it's not all, you know, cookies and glitter and stuff when you go in. It's especially depending on the neighborhood in which you're teaching, right? But yeah, I had a huge fear of failing my students. Now, when I taught pre-K, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. You know, you've got all these babies and you know, you do a lot of dancing and singing all day long. But third grade was, you know, testing all day long, testing. And one of the biggest things I didn't want to do, which was going on when I was in school, was, you know, you had to focus on testing so much. And I said, when I became a teacher, I wasn't going to do that. And what happens, as soon as I took roll, they were like, all right, so we have STAR testing coming up, because I taught in Texas. We have STAR testing coming up, so you have to give them this. And I was testing my kids every single week, felt like. And it was just a lot. It was a lot. And it was a lot on them. The expectations for them, it was unreal. Because it wasn't catered to. You talk about equity, it wasn't catered to who they were. It's this cookie cutter education, and they live in a world of lack. They live in or even if they don't live in a world of lack, it's a lack of awareness of what they could do, or, you know, how they could do certain things or experience certain things. So I you know, go talk.
Yeah, you did a good job describing this. I'm going to let Susan talk. I swear. I'm like, just like,
Come on, Susan.
That's okay.
Oh, it's like Crystal. And
You don't have to worry about me. I'll jump. You know, I'll jump in. There are a number of things that I'm thinking about, though, that you brought up that I think are really resonating. One, that sort of dilemma that I think every teacher goes through around the what draws us to come to education, that passion and love for teaching, and that fear of not being what we thought or know that they need. And then the demand, like all of the different demands and how those get in the way with the vision of the teacher that we want to be. And then the reality of having so many kids with so many needs in the classroom, which is kind of what I was, these demands, and then thinking about it from the experience of the child sitting in the seat and where the lens of which they experience that at. And there's so many complex ways in which these things are coming together. So I'm excited that we're going to be talking to Zaretta Hammond in a couple weeks, because I think she really has, she's going to give us some insight around like what are some of the concrete things that we can do to make sure that we are showing up in equitable ways. But what you just described, I think so many teachers go through. And then if we do not have the ability to reflect on ourselves and what it is that we bring to the work and the lens that we bring to the work and the privilege that we bring to the work, that we then, there's so many things we're trying to hold at the same time. So it's like, am I singling this kid out because I have these biases, or what do I do with a kid who's cussing me out and refuses to sit down? And then, like, so those two realities that are sitting there at the same time. I understand that this child's needs are because they don't have enough food, or they were up last night taking care of their child, but right now in this moment he's cussing me out in front of the whole class. And so how do I bring those two things, those two realities together at the same time? So I was really hearing you and feeling like that dilemma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I kind of wonder about. And I guess maybe that kind of brings me back to this, like the big quandary I have in education, which is if we imagine teachers that don't have the same lived experience of their students, then they're not able to cue in, like the things that you just described, and you didn't teach for very long, but you just named, and it gives me shivers, like to think about it, like, you just named the dynamic that every teacher faces, and in such a beautiful way that it's like, you think it's going to be glitter and cookies and you're going to come in, or maybe, you know, a lot of people think they're going to come in and they're going to save people. And then all of a sudden, like the dynamics of what's happening in your room can be so complex. And if I think about your experience too, of like, well, when you were in Oakland, you were one of a group of people and the teachers met you where you were, and they didn't, like, you know, your behavior wasn't a problem. And you went outside of that to an environment where you didn't look like everyone else, and where the norms were different. And suddenly those same behaviors that were fine in Oakland weren't fine in Concord. And suddenly you're being singled out and like pigeonholed in ways that weren't like fair. That's the worry I have in education, how we're preparing educators, and why I think we need culturally responsive training for teachers, because all of us come with our own experiences. And again, that was the gift I had with having Mr. Abdul as my co-teacher. And, you know, I grew up, you know, with some hard stuff, and I grew up in the East Bay where, you know, equity was, you know, a part of my landscape for my whole life, right? Like, so paying attention to that. But I also had somebody who was literally like sometimes whispering in my ear, but definitely like calling me out in a loving way if I said or did something that was sideways for any of you guys, because none of us wanted that. And he knew I didn't want that. So I had this opportunity to learn and be like, oh, and we would just talk about you guys. And I'd be like, oh, well, I'm seeing this. And he'd be like, well, I'm seeing that. And I'd be like, oh, okay, the same kid that we're wondering about, we have these two different perspectives. What does that mean? And so rarely do you have that opportunity. And yet we're in this room and we're making split-second decisions. And some of those can impact how kids see themselves. And it takes me back to, you're in Concord where you weren't being like seen well, as far as I can tell, but also that was a place where at least one person made a split-second decision to give you an intervention that made a difference. And how powerful those moments are. And they can come anywhere. And that's the gift and the magic of education too. But it's like, I just feel sometimes like so tenuous, like our ability to like support kids, and how many of your classmates didn't have that opportunity, right? We can name them. And I do talk to Jamil, who's a teacher now.
Oh yeah.
Every day. And yeah, I don't know.
Another issue that I totally hear, and one of the things that you're saying, Megan, that I think we need to think about is that you had in the moment. So I do think we need pre-service training for understanding and bias, but we also need more opportunities for support for teachers in practice while they're working, and that it's like one of the only professions where you are on the whole, there is no like thinking and planning time. It's like these little crammed in PDs. And I know we're doing more of it, but that professional learning time, like I don't think there's any other profession that has the amount of time where the amount of time you have to plan in relationship to the amount of time that you have to do is just doesn't seem very proportional. No. And that we need those in the moment, like I'm struggling with this situation and I need help reflecting and thinking about it. That came up.
Yeah, we need to open up to that, right? And to create So it's something, and I'm just monopolizing the conversation today because of,
No, it's fine.
but I mean, it's one of the things I've been talking a lot about in recent years, because I spent a long time being like, well, I'm just going to be hard on, white educators, and I want to make sure that no one harms any children, right? And then I had to take a turn, and I had to look at myself and be like, okay, well, I was a white educator who did do harm. So what made the difference? And that's when I actually started to make this connection with all of what happened with our classes and with Mr. Abdul and with other folks that I had the opportunity as a young teacher to have. And you're right. What I would say, if I were to distill that down, what happened for me and what I would want for others is there was a trust and a safety to explore issues of race and equity in like ongoing. And that's what I think we really need, which means we need to build community and safety for teachers to talk with each other. Like, I knew Mr. Abdul loved me and cared about me, and that you all did. And I remember actually once, and I don't know if it was your class or not, but he had me stand up in front of the whole class because I think it was one of your classmates who said I had said something that she felt was racist. I don't remember who it was now. But like, I stood up in front of everybody and I had to hear for the whole class, like, this is what happened and let's talk it through. So I don't remember when that happened. I feel like it was your group, but maybe it wasn't.
It might have been. Again, we have this old lady fog going on.
You can't be an old lady because then you're really old.
You can't do that to me. But I mean, of course, and I remember differently. When you're a kid, what you remember is so different than an adult. Yeah. But like, I remember that moment, and it felt like really hard for me, but it also felt really important because I was like, okay, this is hard for me, but the kids are getting to see that actually you can stand up to power and you can like survive that and move through it. And that was, again, like these intentional moves that we were making so that you all had an experience of feeling equity. And it's what I want for us to be able to provide for everybody. Yeah.
Well, I think hard is what changes us, but
right.
So that's important. But I'm curious, Crystal, there was something else that I want to go back to something that you said before about getting on BART and bus to come to Claremont, making that choice as a family to come all the way across town to find a school that you felt like was going to give you the academic experience that you needed and deserved. Mm-hmm. And I look at busing. I'm from back east, from Boston area, and we have a long history of busing and how that played out there that I think a lot of people know about. But mm-hmm. Here in Oakland, I think when we think about options and how options came about as an attempt to create equity, but it actually unintentionally has reinforced inequity and disproportionality. And I'm curious what that process was like for you and your family, and what that was like for you to travel across town every day to go to a school that was going to meet your needs.
Okay, so as I finished up 5th grade, there was another parent whose child also went to Claremont. My mom was talking to her, and she said, yeah, I'm going to send him over to Claremont. It's a magnet school, blah, blah, blah. Now, my mom isn't the most educated woman. She didn't go to college and all that stuff. And as you can see, it took me a long time to learn to read. So she wasn't as active in my educational process. And that just comes from socioeconomics and culture. And like I said at the beginning, I was upset at her once I became an adult because I didn't understand what was going on. Now that I know and understand the various levels and layers to this all, I understand that she's very much so a product of, culture, generations, and so on and so forth. But I was totally upset with her. And, I would say things when I was in a teenager, high school, college age, like, oh, why didn't you do this? And, poking fingers at her. But she, looking back on the fact that she made the decision for me to go to a magnet school away from the neighborhood where I was, because I didn't want to fight every day. And that was like totally the expectation of Madison. Like when you go to Madison, oh, we about to fight every day. Oh, we about to do this every day. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Send me somewhere else, Mom. And so she made that decision for me to, advance elsewhere. And I'm so grateful that she always allowed me to explore and be exposed to different things in different places. So that was the reason why she did it. She knew that if this parent knew about Claremont and she spoke so highly of it, because at the time it was like one of the best schools to go to, it had to be, a great decision. And so she enrolled me in the lottery, and I got chosen. And they also offered the affordable bus passes or free bus tickets back then, or bus passes and BART tickets. So, you know, that was the family decision, was to ship me to ship me across town every day. And, you know, that alone just exposes your world, because you're now on the train with business people, homeless people, you know, people with mental disabilities and whatever else. So you're just getting a whole world of education just in that hour and a half travel commute each way. And so I did that, and I'm probably rambling, and I probably missed half the question just now. What was the other part of the question? Was like, what was it?
I mean, that was the big part of the question, but I'm also wondering, so now we really understand that the intention was just exactly your experience, right? Your experience was the intention of options, that it worked. And unintentionally, we've divested from neighborhood schools, and what ends up happening is we end up with greater disproportionality, and in some parts of the city, almost segregation. And so curious. So I think again, we come back to these complex issues of making sure that every child has an opportunity, has an interventionist when they need reading, has enough adults who can be attending to the needs of kids, but really these complex ways. So that was really around my questions, is like, how did your family decide to do that? What was the impact? And then really thinking about it from this complex systems perspective of how do we move forward as adults now who care about equity?
It's a hard question. I mean, as far as how do we move forward, because
I mean, you don't have to, there's a lot of, you know, I'm just curious about your vision. I'm not made.
You know, ultimately it's always about, you know, money and access and stuff, you know, always. And in Claremont's neighborhood, you had more funding, obviously, to provide the Arts Magnet label, and to have, you know, we had what we call wheel, where you, every 6 weeks, you would rotate into a different, you know, we played the recorder, or we learned Spanish for 6 weeks, or we, you know, did karate for 6 weeks during the wheel course. I don't know if the school in my neighborhood had that, but I mean, they had PE, I know, but I don't know if they had the option to do karate, painting, Spanish, computer science the way that we did, you know? So I think for sure, I agree with the main consensus is economics, for sure. And I used to get teased going home after school.
In Sobrante, were you in the Sobrante Park?
I lived in Brookfield. Yeah, I used to get teased for, you know, going to Claremont and not, you know, kind of chickening out and going to Claremont, as if I had a choice, really, choose what school I went to. But, oh, you go to that school over in, you know, with all those other kids and stuff like that. And it couldn't have been far from the truth. You know, it was just a different experience. It was a much more privileged experience, I will acknowledge. I'm very grateful for having that particular privilege of going to Claremont and being exposed to Project Yes, and you know, all the different various I don't know if MISA was there too. You have all these different groups that I'd never heard of. And I don't say that the school in the neighborhood didn't have those, but I wouldn't know, you know, because I didn't go there. But I know that one of the main focuses was fighting. And I didn't want any parts of it. That was a huge, you know, part of what was going on where I grew up, even in elementary school. But, you know, I had a little bit of exposure to arts and everything, a little bit of exposure to, you know, some things that weren't typical, because, you know, we still live in the Bay Area. So we did have access to Apple computers and stuff like that, because, you know, Apple would donate a lot of computers to the school, and they would guinea pig us, they would beta test us with a lot of their programs and stuff like that. So that was some form of privilege in my neighborhood that a lot of kids in other places didn't get to have. So even just being in the Bay Area alone is a privilege. Just I don't want to put that out there, because kids in Houston don't have that access at all.
Yeah, but, what you're saying is like, it's so interesting, Crystal. It's there's a researcher called John Powell, and he does something that I just think is fascinating. He does something called opportunity mapping. So he looks at geography and your access to opportunity based on where you live, based on the color of your skin, based on your socioeconomic status, and just has done a really great job of showing that your access to opportunity absolutely has this huge influence on what your future will be. And the community you're describing that you grew up in was one that I went back and, because I came back and didn't work in the classroom anymore, and I started working in the district office in Oakland. And then I went around, and I touched my microphone again. And I went around and worked in other schools, and actually worked at Madison. I helped to change it into the K-12 school it is now. And yeah, just that idea of like, right, if I go to Madison, what I have to do is face fighting every day. And if I go to Claremont, what I do is I get to learn, and it was safe then at that school, and I get to have access to art. You're the same human. Again, it's these little moments like really change your trajectory, and it does come down around opportunity. And a lot of families that grow up with more privilege, like it's always just the Claremont option, right? So like, and how that then sets you down this trajectory of access and opportunity into your future. That's not the same for someone that grows up in a neighborhood. That's not a given, right? That's not a given. You're going to have access to all those things. And that's, what drives me still today. I feel like we're probably getting close to being out of time.
We are getting close to out of time. We're a little over 2 o'clock right now, but we got started a little bit late too. So.
I would love to hear a little bit more about your book. And again, like if we do this like full circle moment of like a little bit of what Pumpkin's about. And again, like as you experienced it as a student and then as a teacher, like, because again, you saw yourself in your kids and that inspired you as a teacher, but also inspired you to write this book. So I'm just wondering if you want to share a little more about that.
Oh yeah. So Pumpkin, as I said, is my nickname growing up in my neighborhood. To this day, if I walk down any street in East Oakland, Brookfield, they'll go Pumpkin, and I know who it is. I'll just shake and turn around. But it's about, growing up in my neighborhood and with my grandmother and my mom, moving out. We moved around a lot. We moved back and forth to my grandmother's house a lot. And I think that is really what contributed to me not learning how to read, because I missed a lot of school. The times when kids were learning, I wasn't there, and I was late. I was late to school up until grad school. I didn't become an on-time person until I was getting my master's degree. So there's that, right? But the reason why I wrote the book was I wanted to share my experience, but I had a student who had failed the 3rd grade, and he was being teased. And of course, you have to set the standard. Look, we're not going to be talking about him. We're not going to do this. Like, oh, that's why you're stupid. And, we had to shut that down. And he would even say it sometimes, and it would break my heart to hear him say, I'm stupid, I'm dumb. And I was like, no, you're not. Don't say that. You're one of my smartest kids, da, da, da. I'm trying to lift him up however I can. And it wasn't until the end of the year, I had several meetings with his mom about his behavior, because he was always in trouble and he was always late and absent. He was at a point where he was going to fail 3rd grade again. And I was like, I can't fail him twice. I can't. I finally pull his record. This is my first year of record. I pull his record from the previous year. He had a higher grade in 3rd grade that year than he had with me. And it made me think, I was like, this boy really does think that he's not smart because he failed the 3rd grade. Turns out he failed the 3rd grade, not because he didn't pass the 3rd grade, because of knowledge, because of attendance. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so me. I would have gotten held back so many times because of attendance. His mom would leave him at home, and, he'd be babysitting his sisters, and he's like 10, 11 years old in the 3rd grade. And he would come to school. School starts at 7:45. He'd get there at 9:30, and whatever else. We couldn't even count him for attendance, but he would show up half asleep, crust in his eye and everything. And he would just constantly fall behind. And I really just saw myself in him, and I felt sorry for him and felt so bad that here we are again, and he has to go to summer school. All he had to do was go to summer school, and he could have gone on to 4th grade, and he had a higher grade the previous year. So that really sparked, I think I'd already written the book, but it was like, I have to push the book now. I have to make this be a thing. It's not just about being an author. I want to be an author. It wasn't about that. It was like, I really wanted to tell a story, because I thought it was important for kids to know that there are other stories. Like, you're not the only one. I thought I was the only one until I started teaching, and I saw other kids just like me, 2nd, 3rd grade, couldn't read, couldn't write, spell, or anything like that. So I wanted to write this for the struggling reader, but also tell a story that they could relate to, because a lot of students, they live with their grandparents, or they, one parent or both even, but their parents aren't able to be present like they should, or the expectation in Maine society is that you should be present in this, that, and the third, but you have to look at the generations, you have to look at the culture, you have to look at the socioeconomic stuff and where they came from before now. And so tying all that in, I lived with my grandmother. I showed that I didn't learn a lot until I moved to that school where I looked different. And then I showed the triumph at the end. I don't want to keep rambling on, but basically I saw myself in him, and I saw my story in a lot of my students. And I felt like it was a necessary story to tell that they could relate to, and that parents that aren't present, you know, because there's that expectation, but they can't meet it because they don't know. They don't have the awareness that I should be doing this. A lot of parents send their kids and expect the teachers to teach them everything. They expect us to teach them how to brush their teeth, how to comb their hair, how to clean their ears. That's not the teacher's job, but that's the expectation from their perspective because you're a teacher. So yeah, that's the gist of the book. At the end of the book, obviously, she learns to read, and you know, her whole entire world for education and just life in general opens up. You know, she experiences triumph. You know, I ended up going to the Math Olympics after learning to read. Once I learned to read, I went to the Math Olympics 2 years in a row, and for problem solving, reading and doing complicated math problems. And I became a finalist in the 5th grade. So, you know, literacy is so important. That I just felt like if a kid can see that and see someone that looks like them, similar, and know that I've gone through this experience, that they can also do it too.
It's that personal narrative. It's that personal narrative. Like how do you understand who I am and the challenges that I'm facing and the context that they are? And one personal narrative, I'm stupid and I can't do it, has you showing up in the world one way, where the other has you blossoming like you are, and kind of turning it into this amazing person who's been able to bring that story back to other kids. And that's super powerful. And I'm grateful for you.
I'm grateful for you all. Thank you.
Wow, my heart, can you see it like out of my chest on me with you? I'm just so proud of you. And so, I mean, I think that story is so important because it allows kids to see themselves different. And again, it's like, for me, this is why equity is such a big deal, is we need to be able to have kids see themselves in others and have those role models. So this book is going to be impactful for a lot of kids. And again, how lucky for this boy that he had you as his teacher, who could see past all the stuff and see him for who he was. And it was because you could also connect in with your own lived experience. And again, that's why I think we need a lot of training for educators on equity and inclusion and how to create safe spaces so that we can catch more kids and help them to feel like realized the way that you got to be.
And we are super over time.
I know. I'm going to right now. Crystal, you're amazing.
Thank you so much.
So please check out her work. She does incredible, beautiful modeling as well. And it's just...
And super fun stuff on her website. Like acting. Very fun.
Not the quiet girl I thought I had in my class. And I love it. But just so like the maturity is still totally there, and just like the getting the world, like what you just shared right now is really profound. And I'm so grateful for your time and for just being open to all of our questions. So thank you, Crystal.
Thank you so much. It's like truly been an honor. Thank you so much for having me. I was really having imposter syndrome. I was like, oh my gosh, she's asking me to talk about equity.
It was okay, right?
Yeah, it was great. It was fine. And if I rambled too much, I'm sorry.
No, you did. It was great. All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to The Awakening Educator.